Good. Okay, I'd like to call the Corporate Services meeting back to order and welcome those back who have been watching us live streaming. Next up, action items 3A.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. 3A is the report. You will recall the request from the financial request from the Saugeen Valley Children's Safety Village. So you may want to, the recommendation is for discussion with the 2017 budget deliberations. And I've provided the additional information, as you recall, it was circulated prior, but you had asked questions related to perhaps the boards of education and their commitment. And at this point, no financial commitment has been made. So that was for information, but to also consider that 50% funding of the staff position in the amount of $33,000. You may wish to consider the draft budget report and that documentation, and then circle back to have a recommendation on the Saugeen Village.
That's probably a good idea, so why don't we go into budget discussions?
I can open with a couple of remarks, and then if our CIO would like to add some comments as well. So when we met, of course, the October 13th, when you had met and received all of the documentations and all the draft budgets, and that consolidated budget reflected a 6.62% increase, and we heard your message and went back and reviewed the discussions, but we thought it was worthy to include in this report the factors that were contributing to that 6.62% for your awareness. And we've just highlighted in those items 1 to 15, the items that were contributing to that, including the 150th celebrations, our partnerships, and you heard the good work in economic development as a result of these decisions made previously within transportation as well, long-term care, some provincial subsidy assumptions that may or may not materialize, and in paramedic services, the Power Assist Stretcher program, and the looking in the future to our building replacement reserve, the social housing, the continued commitment in the capital reserve, and certainly that if there was any question that we needed to do that was certainly recognized in the presentation with the asset management this morning. In social services, just recognizing the upload of the savings, the SWIFT project that will continue to move forward now, and just recognizing the impact that will have on the levy as that reserve is depleted. Council's commitment to the Grey Bruce Regional Health Centre, the Wingham Hospital campaign, the recognition of the 2% increase on the non-union, the COLA. Just in general, when we looked at the consolidated across the board with all of our union and non-union salaries and wages and the benefit adjustments, that alone was $1.7 million, or would equate to a 4.2% increase on the levy, and then the adjustment in the how we manage the WSIB reserve in the non-departmental. And then we also identified that not included in the current budget were funds for the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority cover crop program, the Children's Safety Village, and then of course this morning's ask from the Grey Bruce Hospice. There had been question about the education tax rate for residential purposes, and again, quite often that announcement isn't made until Q1 of the taxation year, but that analysis has been provided for your review. The other item, of course, that we have talked is the growth, and what that one, if we were to have a 1% growth, would be approximately $420,000, but that is not impacted or included in this report. That will come with the calculation of the tax rate. So included a transfer, no transfer from the tax stabilization reserve, but would recommend some one-time expenditures to be financed from that TSA. And in the information report today, you received the Q3 and the year-end forecast for our financial position, and suggesting that if in fact the surplus is maintained at where we are currently projecting, that some of those funds could be funded from that. So overall, we have recommended adjustments that would total $1.35 million, and we've listed them in this, and then I'm going to take you to the more detailed document to explain how we reached the $1,348,000 reduction. So in the summary of adjustments, as I said, all departments contributed to these changes when the message was heard. In social services and housing, they have a number of initiatives that they have presented, and again, as we've been able to have the Q3 results, that also assisted in looking forward to where we had savings in 2016 because of efficiencies and how we do business, of course, which is an overall initiative across the county, but now we're going to see those translate into actual budget savings, and for the most part, that's what we're seeing within social services and housing, how they've been able to reduce, and the transition of a position role as well. In long-term care, we have, in fact, in the salaries and the unassigned, that review, again, looking at our 2016 actuals and how we can manage that, and that is under review, but with a recognition of $150,000. You may recall that there's been a project approved, our communications project for Gateway Haven, the nurse call station, the phone upgrade, and that is to be financed from internal financing, and then with a payback of $25,000 per year for 10 years. And in the initial go-around, that was removed because the project is likely to commence in 2017, and then the financing would begin in the following year, but we think it's important to maintain that consistency because $25,000 was included in the 2016 budget. So in this case, we're actually adding an additional $25,000. The museum, a contribution of $5,000, and the planning and development, again, looking where the efficiencies, where they've been able to combine and consolidate for an additional $40,000, and then a little bit with fingers crossed, the forest product sales. There are a lot of initiatives going on in the forestry division. And we look back at three-year average, it would suggest that we can increase that, but there is some caution with that as well. But it has been included in this budget. In transportation, the rebuild of the Wyerton Depot, you recall in the first budget it was showing a repayment of $654,000 all in 2017. This budget would, now that we're presenting, would suggest that $654,000 be repaid over 3 years. There are some implications in that recommendation, given that there is a portion of 2018 and 19 of the capital equipment and housing that was being used to offset that as well. But the engineer will be bringing back a full report early in 2017, at which time we would reevaluate the exact, obviously the proceeds from the insurance as well, and be able to have a full recommendation as to how that. But this is not going to harm the repayment. It's just how we, whether it's 3-5 years, and what amount that would be, and again, not to put any pressure on the remaining part of that capital in that department. You'll see the asterisks, and that's the area where we're suggesting that those items, one-time discretionary funding, would be financed from the tax stabilization reserve. It assumes that that we do maintain the levels that we're at, somewhat that we're anticipating. The budget itself identifies in the first round that we would have at least $135,000 of in the tax stabilization reserves to apply to the levy, and then this would be an additional just under 125,000. Should that not become a reality, then of course we would revisit that in 2017 as to how those would be financed. But that is the capital weather station for the Transportation Department. The funding shortfall of the SWIFT project from the tax stabilization reserve, the 48,000, and the Wingham Hospital, we project the funding was in 2016 was from the TSA, and recommend the same for 2017. And certainly, depending on the year-end results, when they are finalized, we would look at that tax stabilization reserve and if there are opportunities for it where it should be, particularly with respect to some of those decisions that have been made for multi-year commitments. In the paramedic services, you will recall in the last number of years, we do not include the provincial subsidy that's expected for that year, and as a result, in mid-year, we report back, the director reports back to the committee and suggests that reports the subsidy received, and then it has been assigned to a reserve, and that is basically an unassigned capital reserve. So this is a sort of a twofold part. Is number one, we would actually recognize in year the provincial subsidy that we would expect to receive of approximately $100,000, and then we would take that current unassigned capital reserve and assign it as a building reserve. That reserve totals $205,000, and the ask in this year's budget was $150,000. So it would certainly start that building reserve to grow if you were to assign it for that purpose. There's been adjustment in salaries and benefits of $38,000, and then we also looked at the stretcher program and suggesting that we can internally finance that, the $100,000. And then that bridges us to, after 3 years, to a point where there would be there's $290,000 in this current budget. So if we were to reduce, finance $100,000 of it, then in the future years, it becomes part of the annual budget with funding when they're purchasing that stretcher to be part of the purchase of the vehicle. So it would be able to accommodate that to get us to that point. And then the recognizing the rental from the library, the $8,500. For a total adjustments of $1,348,000. And then overall, this document here shows you where this 2016 we started last year our levy of 41 million, our first submission at 46 million, and then submission 2 at 44 million, and then the reduction that we presented today of 1.3 for a total levy of 43,338,000, an increase of 1.4. And you will recall that salaries and benefits alone were in the initial pass-through were at 1.7, and with these adjustments today will equal approximately the increase in the levy, or 3.4% before growth is the recommendation that we have present you today.
Questions, comments? Mike?
My questions goes back to the paramedic services and the capital reserve that were assigned a capital reserve, and there's a statement there in the prior year's provincial subsidy to building the reserve was $205,000. So am I to take from that there is $205,000 in the reserve?
That's correct. So the last 2 years when the provincial subsidy came in mid-year and it wasn't included in the budget.
Okay, that's where it came from. So we just put it into that reserve.
You received it and then reassigned it to undesignated reserve for capital purposes. And this recommendation would suggest that it already exists. So rather than building $150,000 new into the levy, that we just reassign that $205 for that purpose.
Okay.
Ann?
Just for clarification, so when you say the 3.4%, you said before growth, I had thought before you were assuming 1% growth, so this...
Yeah,
this
but this, the 3.4 does not recognize the growth, so once the assessment was to, once we receive and we're hopeful that we would have 1%, that would be incomparable to our last 2 to 3 years, the 1%, and then that would translate into, if the 1% was applied, it would be a 2.4%, which you would see on the tax rate, which would be, of course, that all depends on the assessment.
Okay, thank you.
But the levy itself is really the important number that we
Yeah,
like to look at, and that's 3.4.
thanks. I just wanted to make sure I had that right, that the growth was then extra and not included in the 3.4. Thanks.
Other questions or comments? I know I had a brief discussion with Kelly this morning that we are looking at possibly a $2 million surplus. So I think, Kelly, maybe you'd like to just kind of expand on our conversation from this morning.
Through you, Mr. Warden, that when we were speaking, if in fact the year translates as it's shaping up to translate, that staff would return with recommendations for County Council consideration for that reserve. The Director of Corporate Services and I had talked about, in particular, there was probably merit in funding the SWIFT project as a starting point. It has the potential to dramatically impact our region, but that money would not be released until we got the plan, which remains open at this point in terms of the build-out plan. Second from that, the second piece would be to honor the commitments that have been made for, in particular, the hospitals, to get that part assigned. And then, again, if it holds, that staff would most likely request that you give consideration to taking the balance and allowing it to start to address the capital gap that was presented to you this morning.
So when might that plan be ready then, Kelly?
Through you, Mr. Warden, I'll defer to the Director of Corporate Services to talk through that a little bit.
Are you referring to the plan for the tax stabilization reserve, the surplus? Typically, we would probably be into later in our first quarter when we would have that finalized. A number of factors, including supplementals, tax write-offs, provincial offenses. Those are the items that usually impact fairly significantly on those numbers. We continue to monitor those. We look to have usually by the end of January all outstanding invoices paid, but we are not on an accrual basis, on a monthly basis, so it's a cash basis for that purpose. So we wouldn't have that information, but I don't think that doesn't impact the decision on the budget. I think the things that impact the decision, those would be how would we best, are we best suited to move forward with that, the surplus. The surplus, according to policy, does automatically get transferred to the tax stabilization reserves. But how can we take that to use the word again, how do we take that to stabilize then ourselves moving forward and some of the one-time commitments, and certainly is where we would want to put that surplus and to maintain it for that purpose. And then certainly if there is any direction regarding the cover crop program, the Children's Safety Village, and the hospice, those again are not included in this recommendation at this point. So if there is interest in entertaining funds to be directed to those, they would be added to that 3.4.
Kelly?
Through you, Mr. Warden, the only other comments that I would offer that with this budget, it's now the end of all of the initiatives that Council has supported so far. We're very pleased that we're at this point, in particular related to the economic development portfolio. The budget for 2017 has one full-time equivalent added to it over where we were both on budget and actual for 2016. And that position is the capital position in engineering and highways.
And just a comment too with the, I guess you want to go down to the reserve report and then maybe we'll have some more discussions. I think it's all encompassing, so.
So the information report included the update and the surplus deficit position for all of the positions, or all of the departments. And as we've indicated, that should all of the forecasting completed to date prove to be unchanged at year end, then a surplus of just under $2 million would be the result. But we do know there are a number of contributing factors that can change that, and sometimes it can change it fairly significantly. Mother Nature being one of those. And then we've provided you with also the reserve and reserve fund balances as of at the end of Q3. And I know that we've heard the message before that you find that very helpful to review. And sometimes it's a good reminder for us as well as directors to review that and see, in fact, where certainly healthy balances in our reserves, and as we've consolidated over the last and streamlined the document, I think it's more valuable for everyone to be able to review that. And I can answer any questions specifically related to departments, but hopefully we've provided enough information in the report that highlights what is contributing to any of our surplus and deficit positions.
Questions, comments? Mike?
And I suspect I know the answer, but and we're talking reserves is fine. No, that's fine. In the working reserve, we got 1.3 million. There's at no time during the year do we need to go to the bank for money, or is there enough money in that reserve? Or
We have not short-term
Okay.
financed for many years, and then we actually pay interest to the reserves.
Milt?
Thank you. Betty, on our reserve balance, has it been steady or increasing over the last 5 years?
I can offer that we would bring you back an analysis of that, but it has maintained been maintained fairly steadily and growing in some areas. What I would offer is that we've been able to manage in advance of projects, so to build that reserve to be able to prepare us, but I would commit to bringing back just an overall report. It would be from our financial audited statements that we can show you that, and I think we may even may be able to draw from the report that came from BDO earlier this year, and the supplementary document, I believe it had a reserve, but I'll commit to bringing that back at the next meeting.
Kelly?
Through you, Mr. Warden, with the exception of the WSIB reserve and the forestry reserve, all of the directors have been working really hard to basically eliminate any reliance on reserves within their budgets. So those are the only two in 2016 that have operationally been impacted.
So with that being said, is there anywhere within those reserves that we could maybe utilize some of those this year?
I believe that in other areas of the budget, I can, for example, within corporate services in Park Street, like our facilities, we do utilize those. We have utilized reserves for that purpose, but they're specific purposes. And this document has been provided to the directors, and I think for the most part, they have utilized the reserves where it's been deemed appropriate.
Just general public, when they see $23 million sitting in a a document like this will be thinking, you know, and you're raising my taxes 2.4%, and you have 23 million bucks in the bank. So I think this report that Milt's maybe asked for would somewhat answer some of those questions. But I'm just putting that out there, as that's what the general public would probably look at. Ann?
Well, I think when you consider our asset management, I don't think our reserves are unrealistic for some of the deficits we have coming in the future. And actually, to get our budget down this far, and then if we can dedicate some to asset management, I think we've done pretty well. It's nice to have what we do have for reserves, but after reading that plan and listening to that plan, I think we need fairly substantial reserves for the future, because we have an infrastructure deficit in places. We'll never catch up totally, but at least we might be able to manage it better.
Nope.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting reserves are a bad thing. I was just wanting to see whether we were slowly
The
increasing.
stability of them.
Yeah, whether we were going down or whether we are actually increasing our reserves a bit.
David?
Do we have any indication as to how we compare with other higher, upper tier government in
I'm hoping that we will after we complete the BMA study this year for our benchmarking. And I believe BDO also in that report, so I'll bring that back in any information that we have. But I think it's important that when you just even as I scroll down here and there's you know, our working fund that we have just to be able to give us that stability is 1.3 million paved roads, 2.2 million. We have a bridge reserve of 3.3, but we know how, so it doesn't take long to add up to 21 million. There's a couple of our donation accounts, which we are appreciative in both long-term care and in museum, which is accounts for almost $1 million combined. And the tax stabilization in this report at that time is at the 758,000 but there are commitments within that. Long-term care, the facilities, 649,000, social housing, 2.1. So as we look at those, they're important to have them as we build, knowing that we're going to have to reach out to those to use to be able to eliminate the peaks and valleys that used to, I guess just to avoid those peaks and valleys is really what the intent of that is to do.
And, you know, just for example, the affordable housing program, creation of new units. Like, is that something we're really committed to, or are we committed to maintaining our existing units?
Christine?
So in the next little while, we'll be bringing to you some business case analysis that looks at end of operating buildings and has opportunity for us to look at then, are there some cases where we actually need to tear down because the value is such that we need to rebuild? So it doesn't necessarily mean entirely new units, although in some cases it might be leveraging. So for example, if we had to rebuild a 30-unit building, but with efficiencies, we can get 35 units with the same dollar value. So those are the things that we're just starting to begin to look at. And later this fall, we will be bringing that first look at 2 different properties at end of operating.
Good, thank you.
And that's including possibly selling some as well?
So the study that we've done looks at a few different options in terms of it. It has to look at the location of buildings, what the market value is in particular locations, and a number of different factors. So it does, there are appraisals involved as well.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? So have we set aside another day for budgeting, or are you looking for direction today?
Through you, Mr. Warden, we were hopeful that with what adjustments have been made, that it would be received with approval today to then proceed to prepare the bylaw for passage in December.
That's what I thought. So we do have to deal with a couple issues here, that being the Saugeen Valley and the Children's Safety Village. Thoughts, comments, and the hospice as well as the presentation that was given this morning. Ann?
I just had a question. So when you were doing the suggestion for the surplus, I thought we're going to leave those till we kind of determined what our surplus was, or
No, that
not?
surplus report becomes, so it'll deal with like capital items like the SWIFT project and other different initiatives that, with those dollars, what I'm hearing, the suggestion would be just to pay those off with surplus. Then we wouldn't be budgeting for the years to come. So really what we're looking at today is we have to assume we're not getting anything for surplus, that we're just dealing with the budget as
Okay.
presented today.
Okay.
So anything above that would be a bonus, and those would be the recommendations of maybe paying off the contribution to the Wingham Hospital or whatever. Just putting that out there as possible topics.
So actually, we'll work this in, and then, okay, I get it. I thought we were deferring it till later. Okay. So.
Milt? Oh, sorry,
just
go ahead, Ann.
So on that note, I mean, the Saugeen Children's Village is, you know, safety-wise, it's great. I feel funding an employee is maybe just, that's a lot to ask because it's a long-term commitment. And, but I was wondering if we could just make even a donation of $5,000 or $10,000 to it. I feel if you save, if you help save one life and children and other people from being injured, then maybe we can find money for that when we can't fund a half-time or 50% of an employee. Anyway, that's what I'd like to see.
And what about the Saugeen Valley? So why don't we deal with this? We have 3 separate items. We'll just deal with it one at a time. So we're on the Children's Safety Village. More comments on that because we'll have to make a decision. Either we're going to fund it, we're not going to fund it, or we'll give a small donation. I agree with Ann. I don't think we should be in funding other organizations' positions. I don't think that's a slope we want to get slipping down. So that's my comment on the safety. I think, actually we'll go on to the next one later, but other comments on the safety? Janice?
I agree with Ann. I'd be happy with a smaller donation. I think it's pretty important initiative.
Okay, Mike? So could I suggest $5,000 donation to the Safety Village? We will not fund that position? Okay? Next one, the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority Cover Crop Program, $60,000. Comments on that one? Mike?
I'll start. Thank you, Mr. Warden. We just set the budget at Saugeen Valley, and I think we're somewhere under 2%. Again, this is a program. They are all good programs, but I think if the authority can raise the money through their levy, if they think it's a good program, that's where the money should come from, not asking somebody else to take the heat and they get all the credit.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Ann?
I was reading in one of the farm magazines about the program. It is definitely a good program, and I think in Bruce County, we're all concerned. I gave a speech before on, you know, the environment and the quality of our water in Lake Huron. It's very important, but again, it's maybe not within our mandate, and maybe there's other ways we can contribute to environmental initiatives with some organizations. The part I liked about it, though, I found in my own environmental work, it's great to have money, but you need the people on the ground that can organize it and get your agricultural community or your beach community motivated and know about money available and get it used if you don't have that. So that's what I liked about that cover crop going through Saugeen Valley. You do need somebody to administrate, visit the people concerned, organize the projects. And our watersheds are very important, and, you know, everybody knows that. It's very important, especially to Bruce County. So I hate turning them down, but I'll defer to you Saugeen Valley directors that think you can find money. I beg you to find some money for it in your Saugeen Valley budget, because I think it's very important. The health of our Great Lakes is very important. And taking care of our watersheds. The agricultural community owns a lot of our watershed land, and anything we can do to provide incentives, I think, is worthwhile.
Good, thank you. Mark?
I guess I'm not a big Saugeen Valley believer, nor is our council. We may withhold payments to Saugeen Valley next year unless we're satisfied it's really brightened up. So I cannot see allowing them to expand their mandate when they're already way, way beyond their mandate now. I don't know why you'd want to let the horse get further from home.
Okay.
So I don't think I could support it.
Other comments? So I'm hearing no to Saugeen Valley today as well. And the last one, the hospice, comments, questions, discussions? Milt?
I realize it's important as well, but I think we need more information before we, I think Mark has indicated some things, some information that should come forward before we commit to that project in any way.
Other comments, Ann?
Regarding the hospice, I know it's very difficult because there is no capital funding that I have heard of, and I think somebody else commented, was it you, Robert, about dividing it up. So I agree with needing more information because Kincardine is working hard to get one, and so is Walkerton. And this is, as I understood from his presentation this morning, that other ones around would be satellite, but it would be nice to give, I don't know whether we can give the amount required, but I agree, I think we do need some more information. Unless we could say today, we will commit so much money, but we have to decide how it's divided up.
David?
I think we should defer that decision. I know for a fact that there's more information coming out very soon, which will make our decisions a lot easier and more directed. So I would just hold off on a decision on that, even if it's a year away. I think that could take place. It doesn't have to be now.
Okay, other comments? Janice?
I think the difficulty, I understand what you're saying, Ann, and when you say satellite, like, I still think they're all responsible for their own funding. I don't know that there's going to be one big hospice mothership that's going to send money to little satellite hospices. They're all pretty independent, and without capital funding, I find that unfortunate, and I hope the province changes that. I'd be more interested in giving them a lesser amount, but if you want to defer that, I'm not sure what additional information that you're looking for, but I think they're necessary in general, not necessarily specifically that one. I believe in all of them. I think there's a real need for them, and I just wish the province would step up.
David?
Further comment, I think the question is, do we want to donate money to a Grey County hospice, or do we want to wait and donate money to a Bruce County hospice? So that might help us to decide what we should do. I'm on both sides of the fence, I think, because I've been working on this quite heavily with our local hospice. So is it more favorable to donate to Owen Sound at this point and strengthen the position? I can see that side, as I said before, but I would like to just wait a bit until we get the rest of the information from the LIN and the collaborative committee that's working with the LIN.
Janice?
I mean, it's in Grey County, but it certainly pulls in a lot of Bruce County people. And I mean, if you would compare it to a Kincardine hospice, they probably would have the same number of Bruce County residents that would go into both. But they definitely get an awful lot of Bruce County residents. I know that firsthand.
Mark?
Well, I guess, like I had said earlier, Scott has to have the math after 3 years of operating. This is a mathematical equation. Should we support it? Absolutely. But keeping in mind that Bruce County's heading in that direction, I think we only should support it at the percentage, like if it's 28% in the last 3 years, and I'm not talking about who applied, who actually went through the system is the only thing that has meaning. If it's 28% of the people compared to Grey County, then to me it's 56,000 we donate. It's just simple math compared to the 200 of the Greys, so we're paying our way accordingly. And like Dave says, then we might have a bit of funding for when it happens in Bruce County somewhere.
Milt?
Just the comments have already been made, so I agree with Janice. So some of us do gravitate towards Zone South, the Grey County. So and then, you know, there's a couple other ones I hear is looking at it as well. So do we contribute to them too? They're all important. So we need to get some more information.
Well, from what I'm hearing is that we're not very decisive in this today, and I think deferring it is probably the best thing because, yeah, like you talk about the northern municipalities gravitating to Grey County. Well, we have people here in Kinloss and South Bruce that gravitate to Huron County. So it's something I think we need a lot more information about. And quite frankly, I thought the ask was a little late today, November, before budget, when knowing we have less than a month to pass the budget. So that in itself, to me, is just, it's the time. It wasn't very timely today, especially with all the asks that we have. So I think, personally, I think we should be deferring this for at least till next year, just to get more information and have a better feel of what's going on in Huron County and Bruce County, and I think there will be more information coming forward. So, Janice?
My only comment to that would be, like, in next year in 2018, they're not going to need that capital funding. Like, they'll be up and built. They're moved in March. So I think that's why there's a push. I agree with you, Mitch. I mean, it was a really late ask. I'm not sure why. And I also agree that it should be proportionate. Absolutely. I totally agree. But my concern is if we put it off for a year, they're not going to need it. Like, they do get funding going forward from the province based on how many patients they have in the house. But it's the capital that they're looking for right now. And I mean, they probably will. I would imagine if they're going to be moving in March, they probably will be short and have a mortgage that they're going to have to carry. But you never know. Maybe another Chapman family will come out of the woods and bail them out. But
No, I think every single person sitting around this table wants to help out the safety villages and the cover crops and the hospices and the hospitals, and we're into the school boards, and we're into everything. And we're into broadband, I mean, we can't say yes to everything. So as much as we'd like to, and David?
Should we give them a letter stating support and that a decision will be made on sometime in 2017 regarding the amount? Or just a support letter, not even talking about amount at this point?
I think it's too early.
Yeah.
I do, but because, you know, getting back to Mark's comments and all that, I think we need a lot more numbers. So I would just say that we are deferring until 2018. That's just my thoughts, unless... Ann?
I'd kind of like to give them something if we have more information in the next month or two, or if they can give us the you know, our proportion is, you know, based on the last 3 years, like Mark said. But if they can't give us that and the information's not forthcoming before when we need it, but even a donation of, what? If we have it in this year's budget, if the information is forthcoming, if, I would support that, but a smaller. I think the ask right now, until we get more information about the Bruce County locations. But I would support something, just say, I don't know, can we, 20 or 30,000 for now, and we'll look at, revisit the hospice in 2018. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know what anybody thinks.
Janice?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing, Ann. And I mean, even if you put a number of 50,000 on it, there's no question 25% of those people are Bruce County people. Like, no question at all. But whatever council decides, I'll support it. But I would like to see something go towards them out of this budget, but proportionately speaking. And like I said, 50,000 would absolutely be fair. Yeah, it's a very safe, be a very safe number. I mean, we have more than 25% of our people go through that hospice for sure.
Other comments? Do I have a mover and seconder to put that on the floor? Moved by Janice, seconded by Mark, that a one-time donation of $50,000 to the Owen Sound Hospice. Is that what I'm hearing?
Could we say minimum in case when the math comes through, we are short of that figure? I don't want to shortchange them, but I do want to show them that we're there, but we want to deal with usage for our people, our taxpayers. It's their money, and we have to think about them.
Milt?
I still would like to hear the information that David's talking about, because if we have to be fair to them, we have to be fair to somebody else, and then somebody else to somebody else. So I'd like to make a decision, like an informed decision on how we're going to treat hospice. I don't think anybody's discounting the importance of hospice.
No.
We're not doing that. It's just the actual treating everybody fair. Because if there's something else coming, then we need to be there for something else, I guess, as well.
Ann?
So for this year, could we, for 2017 budget, could we just say of hospice, 50,000 in this year's budget, and if we receive, you're thinking information will come soon, maybe before we're finalized? Yeah. And that would be our maximum for this year. And they would just have to know that we've put some in capital until we got more information. I don't know. I'd just like to see some, that they know that they will get, Owen Sound Hospice will get some from us. But I'm willing to wait a month or two.
Other comments? Sure.
I understand what you're saying, Milton. If things do come forward on another hospice, it wouldn't be until the next budget anyway. So that's why I'm really supporting 50,000 now for this one, and then absolutely deal with the other ones when they come forward in our next budget year.
So may I make a suggestion that we don't have any other comments to go with it other than here's your $50,000, and you don't make any promises?
So the money comes from?
I would put that over to the people holding the,
Through you, Mr. Warden, I would at this point remind council that if you do 50,000 for hospice, then approaching 1% of your levy is going to services that are not part of the core mandate of the county. It's approaching 1%.
yes, and I think that's why everybody comes to municipal councilors and county councilors to help them out in their Which reminds me, the one counselor we had, Steve, you know who I mean, I forget his last name. Guy comes from a business background, joins here in Kinloss Council, and after he was done, he says, I will never do this again because you're not allowed to think like a business person. You deal with your heart and you deal with what the people ask for. So thank you for that sobering fact, Ms. CAO. But where's the $50,000 coming from?
Yeah.
Well, we could review some of your other recommendations. No. If it was the council's choice to the 50,000, I just did some quick math here. So the 5,000 to the Children's Children's Safety Village, and the 50,000 would increase the levy increase to 1.48 million, and it would be a 3.5% increase, 3.53 increase. We have three areas where this budget is recommending that they would be financed from the tax stabilization reserve, but the weather station, 50,000, we're already had 123,000 there. The budget itself, using the adjustments, is approximately 100. So we're into the tax stabilization reserve at almost to 300,000 at this point. It is an option, but I think we've talked about some initiatives that we would want to look at for capital to be able to free up for future years. So this would be 3.53 is what would be recommending with the 50,000.
So we've just raised taxes,
What was it? 3.53?
3.53.
What was the starting?
3.4.
3.4.
With the 1% growth, so. Ann?
And our growth, I think 1% is on the conservative side with the farmland increase coming in. You don't think it'll make any difference? A lot of farm land assessment went up 70%. You've already factored that in?
It does, but our farmland is probably less than 5% of our overall assessment in the county. It's our residential assessment that really carries the load.
Okay, so even with it being, I thought maybe with the whole county you would have more farmland assessment than, say, we do in the municipality of Kincardine, but you don't?
No.
Okay, that's good to know.
Other comments, questions? We have a motion on the floor. Are there any further discussions? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Are we clear?
Just if I may, Mr. Warden, the motion that was just voted on was the 50,000
Correct.
for hospice.
Correct.
So can staff ask for an additional motion in relation to the budget that's before you with that plus the 5,000 for the safety village?
I think we're there. Do I have a motion? Mover, Ann and David. Are there any further discussions on that motion about bringing this budget with the 3.53% increase forward? Mike?
Just a comment to thank staff for that. I mean, they've put a lot of work into it, and we set that number, and I know you probably butt heads around the table lots, but thank you for all the work you put into getting to where we are here.
No, and I want to thank staff as well. I know we had asked for this 3%, and you've come back with better than 3% when it's all said and done with the growth. So I want to thank everyone too. And yeah, anything else? Any other discussions? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Information Technology Services Manager.
There were just two information items that were included on the agenda. The one we've dealt with is the third quarter financial update, and the other one was released. It's the announcement of our Information Technology Services Manager and the successful recruitment of Michael Kirkpatrick. And we're certainly welcome Michael to the county and look forward to working with him and his skills that he can provide to the county.
Motion to adjourn. Robert, David, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. HR next.